towards the end of 2025, and definitely in the last 2 weeks, where we've seen the hit in sheep prices hasn't helped either. And I think that is a challenge going forward. I think that if there was ever a time for the meat industry to support the price, it was the last couple of weeks, because it's just that feeling of sort of sentiment or confidence is at a low ebb at the moment.
Hello, I'm Kieran Lynch and welcome to OviCast, the Chocolate Sheep podcast. Each episode will bring you less insights, advice and technical updates for the sheep industry. Now for this, the 300th episode, we took the opportunity to maybe take a broader look at the industry, where it's come from and where it's going to. I'm delighted to chat with Darren Carty, Sheep and Schemes Editor with Irish Farmers Journal. Darren, in a wide-ranging conversation, discusses where the sheep industry stands today, covering everything from ewe numbers to lamb throughput, price trends and what's happening on the export market, as well as policy changes shaping farmer decisions. We also touch on farmer demographics and highlight areas of resilience and opportunity and what the current trends could mean for the road ahead. Darren, great having you on again. We're going to chat a wee bit about where the industry is at the moment and where we've kind of come from and its current situation, maybe some of the outlook and more positive aspects towards the end of it. But if we look back maybe over the last decade or even 15 years, we have seen a shift in ewe numbers, we've seen a shift in kill. It's probably something a little bit more in focus at the moment because we're on a downward trend. How would you characterise the last decade number-wise, and what impact has that had on sheep throughput?
Yeah, it's a funny one, Kieran, because if we go back to, say, 2009, 2010, 2011, we would have been talking in 9 and 10 around numbers being under significant pressure. There was coming on the back of a few years of a downward trend. We were talking about numbers getting to critical mass. There was about 2.1, 2.2 million ewes in the country. You had the introduction of the grassland sheep scheme to try and support or try and bolster the increase in numbers. But the big thing then that probably helped it was there was a significant increase in price. And that sort of supported or kick-started a bit of recovery in the flock. And over the following years, you went from 2.2 million ewes in 2010 to about 2.4 in 2014. Then there was growth into 2016-17, where it went up to 2.64. There was a small bit of sort of reaction or a bit of a sort of reduction in, because when you had the abolition of milk quotas, what you seen was numbers reduced significantly. Wexford, Tipperary, Cork, Kilkenny's, all those areas where you had big growth in 15, 16 and 17. But at the same time as numbers were reducing there, what you had numbers probably building in some of the western counties. And some of that was influenced by commonwealth framework plans, having to have activity on hill and mountain areas. There was a bit more of growth in the likes of Donegal, where you're seeing a reduction in suckler numbers, and you're seeing sheep coming back in to replace that. Similar in Sligo, Leitrim, Cavan, and right down along the western coast, in that you probably reached a peak in 2021 of ewe numbers being up near 2.7 million, and that's as good as really as it got. Slight reduction thereafter, but in the last 2 years we've seen a major readjustment in the national flock, and that has gone in the wrong direction.
Yeah, it's interesting. Look, the dairy expansion obviously in the southeast had a major impact, and that's had a knock-on impact obviously in supply and indeed in some of the local abattoirs in the area. That significant drop down in the last couple of years. Like, if we look back at what has changed, we've seen the dairy expansion and the impact that has had. You've touched there on the shift between sucklers and sheep in western counties. Okay, so in the last couple of years, we've had the introduction of the organic scheme. That certainly had an impact, but it doesn't really account, Darren, for that full shift in numbers either.
No, and I put down here in a lot of the shift in numbers and a lot of the reduction in the ewe flock to weather in 2024. And some might say it wasn't that serious, but I remember doing a meeting, I think it was in Longford, and it was a few months after it. I think it was in August of that year. And I asked for a show of hands on who was retaining numbers or who was cutting down on numbers. And there was a husband and wife they were up near the front, and they said that they were reducing numbers. And I said, why? And they said they were both working off farm. They had about 200, I think, and 60 ewes at the time. And they said they normally would have maybe took it in shifts, took a bit of work, say time off, that type of thing. And normally would have went well when years were going good. But just the drudgery of 2024, when you had continuous inclement weather, and the point they made was that they never got a break, that normally they would have worked hard for maybe 4 or 5 weeks, but then it was 8 weeks, 9 weeks. You were going out to the fields maybe 3, 4 weeks after lambing and bringing in ewes and lambs, whereas normally after a week you would have turned them out and expected to get going. And I think that is shown too, that when we see the results of the sheep census this time, I think myself, I don't think we're going to have lost a massive number of flocks overall, but the distribution of sheep numbers, I think, is going to have changed. And I think probably the one area that's come under, or the one type of farmer category that's come under the most pressure has been that farmer maybe with 150 to 300 ewes or above that, that they have cut down. And I think that that's probably where a significant number of, say, the loss or a significant percentage of the reduction in your numbers has come, I think, from those more intensive farms. Yes, there has been a reduction in lowly stock farms, but it hasn't had the same impact, I think, on some of the numbers going in some of the more intensive units.
And I suppose, but in context, there was a bit of a perfect storm. We've seen that increase in price leading into it. A bad spring in 23. You'll weather one bad spring. The second one was really etched into everybody's memory. So it was a combination of a couple of them things. Had that impact probably on those busier farms more than the lower stock ones?
Did, and did the one thing that probably limited the potential to readjust or recover from that is that we were coming off very high hogget prices in the start of the year. There was a lot of ewe hoggets killed, and there was less sheep retained on farms because over the last few years we have seen a significant upward momentum in price. So you had a double-edged sword of you had hoggets being a good trade, farmers opting to kill some of those, even some of the specialist hoggets producers would have opted to move on some of those. And what you had is less numbers in the back end. And I know some farmers might say, well, your land prices were better. There was, say, it was up to farmers to go out and compete for hoggets, but there's a certain level that farmers are happy to go to. And I think that what you've seen in the last 2 years, that as well as maybe cull ewes being moved off farms faster, decisions to reduce numbers, there hasn't been that opportunity to maybe buy in cheaper sheep. There has been very little recycling of ewes on farms, so any ewes that have been barren have been moved off because of the relatively high cull ewe price. And I think all of that together has combined or added into that reduction in numbers.
You touched on something else there, and we remiss me not just to remark it. That specialist hogget producer that carried through breeding stock, he hit a couple of difficult years. He had the option for a higher price. One of the consequences of that, Darren, is a reduction in the number of breeding sheep going out. And we've actually seen a little bounce back maybe in the last 12 months in the price of those breeding animals. They were getting a better reward for their efforts.
Oh yeah, and anybody that retained them last year, like there was farmers and some people would have questioned retaining them, like questioning retaining hoggets that were selling for over €200 last spring, and thankfully they got the bounce, like they got rewarded for keeping them, and hopefully that will say feed into some people holding them this year. Probably another thing that will feed in a bit is that there's a lower value of those replacement ewe lambs or replacement hoggets, whatever you want to call them, at the moment. So maybe farmers might be encouraged to hold them on, given the strength of sales last back end. But definitely the numbers of breeding sheep available in the market has been lower, and that sentiment among farmers to hold replacements was hit as well.
Look, we touched there on organics briefly. You mentioned about the shift a couple of years ago towards the Western counties. Probably the impact of organics was more keenly felt in those Western counties, and it has had a slight impact on the ewe numbers as well.
It has, Kieran, like it's whether it be organics or whether it be some farms that have been retaining maybe what I describe as ewes that aren't productive. Now, whether it be for one reason or another, because the age profile is pushing on and they're keeping some dry ewes because of scheme compliance, or just to keep a number where it is, but maybe not letting the ram out with as many. But on the organic side, what we definitely seen is some farmers reducing numbers because they might have been operating at a level that wasn't sustainable with no chemical fertilizer, or else they wasn't willing to give big money for concentrates to keep the stocking rate at the same level. But like we've all heard anecdotal stories, and more than anecdotal in a lot of cases, of maybe some of the farmers that have been on hill systems not letting out as many ewes to the ram, or cutting numbers just to suit the system. So on a lot of those systems, some farmers have said, I go into organics and look at if I have to reduce back to keep the same level, or to keep the same level, I suppose, maybe of premium coming into the bank account, because a lot of farmers are reluctant to dip into that organic money to go keeping the system afloat. And look, you can't blame them if that's the system that's there. And that definitely has had an impact here as well in numbers.
Could have been a very individual, correct decision for an individual, but does pose a bit of a challenge maybe at an industry level.
Oh, big time. Like, and look, there would be criticisms, and I've gone to meetings and farmers would criticize saying that we're now putting 260 million of gap money into organics, the same as what goes into sucklers and a multitude of money that goes into sheep farmers. But it's a commercial decision for the farmers that have gone into it. And if you're looking at the payments there, which an average organic payment is 12,000, in a lot of those farms, they can have reduced down production slightly and they're still in a much better position. And that has driven the increase in organics from about 1,800 participants up to over 5,000, and is the reason why we've seen the Department of Agriculture closing off the schemes, say the organic scheme to sheep, dry stock, suckler farmers, because they ran out of money essentially, that the interest was that high. It was very attractive with the payment rates that were on offer.
We can certainly change the landscape somewhat. If we're to stand back at Irish Ag at the moment, one of the things we continually talk about succession, we talk about the increase in age profile. It's not exclusively the sheep. It has been right across the board. Maybe, Darren, we were touching on it a wee bit, but maybe one of the more positive things about it, we mentioned the breeding sales earlier. There is an interest among young people again. You go to any of these sales that it's more active. So we do have an industry challenge, but it's not totally negative. We do see young people getting more interested in it.
Yeah, and it's very heartening to see both on the sheep and cattle side. Like when you look at, and you can pick the areas. Like if you look at the Mayo Mule and Grey Face producers, the Cooley sheep breeders, the Tulla sheep breeders, Boris Yore breeders, there is those sort of areas where there's good groups, Donegal as well. I could name out numerous ones, and that sort of, I think, whether it's friendly rivalry or an interest or I suppose there's more than going on than just the sale itself. So it's getting young people involved, it's getting young people interested. The stock judging, there's who's going to win the sheep, the prize for the best penny ewe lambs, the best penny hoggets. And I think it's that sort of encouragement and interest that is driving it. And we do see that bit of an interest. We do see a lot of interest, I think, rightly or wrongly, in some pedigrees, say younger people getting into pedigree. Some of that is into say embryo transfer. We That's, I suppose, an argument for another day, Kieran, whether the direction of the industry is going in the right place and whether that's the right route. You'd like to see more than young people coming into the commercial side as well. But look, at any side they come into on the sheep side is heartening, and we have seen that interest in the last while, and it's good to see. But we need more of it. The average age of a farmer now, like a sheep farmer, is 58 years. But as you rightly pointed out, the average age of a suckler farmer is nearly 59 or 59 and a half. The average age of a dairy farmer is right up there. The average age of a tillage farmer is up there. So it's not unique, the challenge to, say, the sheep sector. This is going to be a unique challenge right across farming, because there is, I suppose, maybe wild sheep, one of the things there would be is sort of labour, off-farm income, that type of thing is probably tightening it. On other sectors, there is challenges that there. Tillage is poor profitability. Dairy, getting labour, getting help is a significant challenge now. And I think it's a change in lifestyle of younger people that's coming in, and we do need to be cognizant of that. And I think that one of the definite areas where we do need to spend a bit of more focus on going forward is showing systems that maybe can be operated with lower labour, but they can still leave a significant contribution to family farm income.
No, I'd agree with you fully. And look, probably some of our emphasis will have to shift a little bit over the coming years to account for that more part-time nature. I know something my colleague has done work on and we've chatted to you about before. Probably something else, Darren, like you've been at meetings and events up and down the country over the last couple of years, and so have I at many of them. Maybe it's anecdotal as well, but it does seem to have a wee bit more people turning out to things on the sheep side of it, and a younger crowd coming with them as well, which is a positive. I think we should latch on to that.
Definitely. And one of the big things as well, Kieran, I think, is that we're not just seeing, like traditionally you would have seen, yeah, young lads coming to meetings. Now you're seeing a lot of interest from female farmers, and particularly on the sheep farms. I think that's probably trending ahead of other farms. And that's great to see as well, because you're going to need that interest right across, say, males, females, if we're going to sort of keep, what way would you describe it? Like a critical mass of numbers, because at a stage, if we reduce down numbers much further, well, then it'll be have we critical mass to keep the level of processing that we have in the country, to maintain the markets that we have. And that's a big factor going forward as well.
No, it definitely is. And look, at it, there's a lot of community things involved in it. There's a bigger picture than just solely the nuts and bolts of it. But maybe look, to get back to that for a moment, we've seen a drop in numbers. We've seen a slight drop in throughput as well. That's going to have an impact. Probably one other thing, though, that has characterized the industry over the last couple of years is we have seen relatively good returns. Price-wise, it has been trending upward, Darren. Maybe we aren't feeling that optimism as much. Maybe it hasn't gone to the same extent as some of the other sectors. But if we looked at the last decade, we have seen a price increase. We've seen an increase in returns.
Yeah, and like if we look at the prices and we see that like in 2011, 2012, 13, 14, we were down at somewhere between 450, 480, €5 a kilo. Came from 2020 to 2021 and 2022, and we jumped from about five, I think it was 520 or something, to about 670, 680 a kilo. I think it was similar in 2023. So you had a substantial increase there of €1.50 a kilo. But most sheep farmers never felt that because it was eroded due to higher costs, higher fertilizer costs, higher energy costs, higher feed costs. But in the last 2 years, we have been in a position, I think 2024 was around 770 a kilo. And last year, I think price was up 32 cents across the year. But we're all guilty of doing this, Kieran, even myself included. I'm the exact same of looking at a prism of what was the most recent. So if we look at, say, 2025 and you're to ask a sheep farmer, how was 2025? A lot will say, Asha, disaster. We finished the year €1 a kilo behind the previous year. And that is sentiment, and sorry, it's more than sentiment, it's fact. So, but it's sometimes masked over the fact that across the year we were 32 cents a kilo ahead of the previous year. And parts of, I think, what probably didn't favour sheep farmers last year is this the sheep industry got the significant rise from 23 to 24. Beef prices rose to such an exponential level last year that if you were comparing and you were a mixed farmer with sucklers and sheep or beef and sheep and you were looking at the returns from both, or you were a sheep farmer and you were looking at your neighbour who was selling weanlings or selling stores or finished cattle, and prices just literally took off on those, that you went from a stage of sheep being ahead of cattle, albeit briefly, to then being significantly behind them. And I think that the combination of that, of maybe the challenge at the end of the year, the prices not getting any seasonal increase, cattle prices being ahead of sheep, I think that hit sentiment, it hit optimism, confidence, whatever way you want to call it. And I think that had an impact towards the end of 2025, and definitely in the last 2 weeks, where we've seen the hit in sheep prices hasn't helped either. And I think that is a challenge going forward. I think that it was really a time, if there was ever a time for the meat industry to support the price, it was in the last couple of weeks, because it's just that feeling of sort of sentiment or confidence is at a low ebb at the moment.
And it's easy to dent, like we need those sore lamb producers as well, finishing at the moment. Like that's a vital outlet, particularly for our hill farms. It's a hard pill to swallow when that we aren't seeing a similar return to where it was last year. And it's been a strange back end where prices have been stagnant, nearly consistently stagnant over the last 3 to 4 months in a very tight range.
In a very tight range. And that's all coming down to, I think, that factories got into a system of where they were prepared to do with less. That if we look back and we see the record levels of throughput or near or 20-year high, whatever you want to call it, in 2024, combined with high prices, this time last year, factories had to get cheap, that they had sold forward in contracts. They got caught a bit offside on the numbers in the market. There was big returns from that, and you're seeing a situation that for the first 4 or 5 months of the year, prices trended well above where people probably expected them to go. And factories, I think, learned from that and didn't sell forward as much volumes, and realigned or changed their business model in cases, I think, to doing with less, and not being in a position where they had to go out and compete with each other for an infinite supply in the market.
Might come back to that in a minute when we look at the overall impact on trade, because it's going to have implications going forward. Maybe just look directly outside of our own realm here for a wee minute. What we've seen happen down south, we've seen a similar picture up north as well.
Oh yeah, and like it's not unique to Ireland and Northern Ireland. I think that we've seen a picture right across Europe that over the last decade we've seen reductions. France and Spain, Germany, Belgium, Netherlands, that we haven't maybe seen the same reductions here, particularly in the last 4 or 5 years. There's been a decline across continental European countries, whereas Ireland has stemmed that decline, Northern Ireland has stemmed it. The UK, to a point, numbers have come back. But if we look at Northern Ireland, I suppose they didn't get the reduction we seen in 2024, but last year they got it with a bang. So, like, sheep output fell by 17%. And Northern Ireland, I suppose, maybe it's a unique market in that there's more sheep processed or exported out of Northern Ireland than what there is internally in Northern Ireland. So the sheep kill last year would have fell by 11%, finished up about 450, 460,000 head. So it's 50,000 head down. But the big change was around exports. So if we look at exports for direct slaughter to Ireland, they were down almost 100,000 head. That was from a combination of both sheep going direct for slaughter and going onto farms. If you looked at exports to Britain, they reduced from about 150,000 head back to 115,000 head. Yes, there was higher numbers went across to Britain for direct slaughter, and there was lower numbers that went to other continental EU countries, with the overall impact that you had 122,000 less sheep exported out of the north. So in 2024, you had a bumper year, 565,000 sheep exported. That fell to 440,000 last year, a 21% drop. So that 21% drop in exports, 11% drop in slaughterings balanced out to 17% of reduction overall. And that was significant. And if you look at one of the worrying things is that what I talked about, say, the Irish context of maybe more intensive producers reducing, or even some small scale producers reducing numbers, some of the preliminary data in the north would say that it's a combination of some farmers reducing numbers, but a significant numbers exiting the sector as well, which is a worry long term. And this is something that's not unique. Look, what I talked there about, if we look to Europe, like there's been significant reductions. The French sheep meat production is down 5% this year. The Spanish has stayed steady. Romanian is down 5 or 6%, but there's been significant reductions across other countries. Now, part of this is to do with blue tongue virus, but I take Germany, 35% of a drop in production. I'd say a lot of that is probably blue tongue related. Netherlands down 6 or 7%. They've been trending that for the last few years. Belgium down 10%. The only countries that's seen an increase in numbers was Italy and Greece, and that was on the back of higher cull ewes because there was lower returns in milk and sheep flocks, and that increased the number of cull ewes. So if you were to look at, say, the prospects across Europe, there has been a significant reduction, particularly in the last 5 years. I think we've lost about 4 or 5 million sheep from the European sheep flock.
If we take that in the context, we know some of the same challenges over a couple of years. There has been that impact of blue tongue and other issues coming up as well locally with policies, but that's going to have a knock-on impact on how self-sustainable Europe is, on how much we need to import. What does that picture look like now? And going forward, I'm assuming that's only going to get worse in terms of the deficit there between the two.
Yeah, so we would have been about 93, 94% self-sufficient in 2020. That would have declined slightly in the years after because there was production, say, started falling from 2020 onwards. To now, I think that the EU Commission have revised their figures and they're down now at about 87% self-sufficient. So instead of having that trend line of being 91, 92% self-sufficient, they've reduced that by 4 or 5%. And that's all coming on the back of that sort of significant fall off production, going from about sort of 570,000 tons of sheep meat across Europe to 520 odd thousand tons. So it's a significant fall. That does two things, Kieran, as well, is that it opens the door to imports, so it opens the door to higher volumes coming from New Zealand and Australia. But when you have a lower availability of lamb in the market, and particularly when it's at maybe a slightly higher price point in recent years, it does affect consumption. And especially when you have inflationary pressures of what we've had in recent years, you see sales of pork, sales of poultry growing at an expense of, say, sheep meat consumption. And like if we look at consumption across Europe over the last 7, 8 years, we essentially have lost the equivalent of the amount of sheep meat we exported out of Ireland in 2025. So the consumption fell by about 50,000 tons. So that has long-term implications. Now, on a positive note, and not to be, Ginny, I think for anyone listening to this, that it is important to state like that there is a silver lining to this for sheep farmers as well, is that we have access to the highest value market nearly globally. Yes, there is a couple of more markets, Switzerland, Japan, but the volumes are low. So we've access to one of the highest value and highest volume markets on our doorstep, and sheep production is falling. So the farmers who do stay in sheep, that sort of certainty of a market is there and certainty of prices. One of the things we should have mentioned as well is the EU Commission have done say, it's a bit of a sort of forecast or look forward to where numbers will be in 2030. And they're looking at a continued contraction. And the price that they're estimating is across Europe, the price will be upwards of €9 a kilo. Now, that's not to say the price in Ireland will be, because there's always a differential, there'll be averages.
Yeah.
But that rise in price prediction should lift all prices. So there should be, looking forward, there is a prospect of prices increasing. Now, as you said, does it open the door for higher volumes of imports? It certainly does. But if we look globally, the same powerhouses that were, say, pumping sheep onto the global market, and in particular New Zealand, doesn't have the same production capacity as what it had in the past.
No, it doesn't. And look at, I think it's a quite stark figure through a moment ago, but there is that double-edged sword. We leave the door open for our competitors. Yes, we have that logistical advantage. The EU is our main market. And there is that price point challenge that if they don't have access to higher volumes, well, price consumer pays goes up and consumption declines. So it's an important context when you're looking at overall where we're going. Right, we touched on the international market. We can't not mention New Zealand. Numbers have declined there in recent years. It's become another challenge for themselves. Australia is the other big interesting one, and they've gone through a couple of very interesting years as well. And of course, the other big player in all this is China.
Yeah.
Because that has one of the big impacts on where everything goes. So where has happened there over the last couple of years, Darren? Where is that going?
It's very interesting. So if we take Australia, and like, if you're to look at Australia and to look at their marketing prowess, or how they market their sheep meat, if they gain access into a market, they go after the highest value, the premium markets, premium returns. And we've seen that in what they've done in China. And one of the things that has hit New Zealand and hit New Zealand prices is that Australia got a foothold in the market. So if we look at what happened in New Zealand from 2012 to 2020 or 2022, they grew their market share in the Chinese market from 12% of exports going to China to about 50% of their exports going to China. Australia got in the door, COVID hit, there was a reduction in imports, but Australia carved out a greater market share. At the same time, Australia was growing market share in the US, and they left themselves in a position where they're now, where last year they exported almost 600,000 tons of sheep meat. So over the last 20 years, they have doubled the amount of sheep meat they've exported. They've gone from 300,000 tons to 600,000 tons. That has had a marked impact, while at the same time, New Zealand has reduced from over 400,000 tons back closer to 300,000 tons. And to me, New Zealand, the capacity to recover isn't there because you have so many competing interests. You have competing interests on the environmental side, you have the competing interests for dairy and land. But even something that a lot of people wouldn't think of is there's been a turn away from sort of the slaughter of what's so-called bobby calves or calves at a young age. So that is now a land competing enterprise. And because beef prices have increased in New Zealand, drop calves or calves from the dairy herd are more attractive. And what you've seen is some sheep farmers reducing numbers and bringing in a side sort of business or an alternative enterprise of dairy to calf to beef on the farm, and that has worked quite well for them as well. So I don't think we're going to see any significant recovery in numbers in New Zealand. On the Australian side, it's going to be down to price and weather. So what we've seen in recent years is we've seen that there's been a few significant weather effects that has had a big impact on both numbers ebbing up and down, prices say increasing and decreasing. But there's a couple other things going on in Australia as well. Wool prices have been under so much pressure that you're seeing some conversions from the likes of merino farms where sheep were kept just for wool production to now crossbred flocks or sort of meat flocks, and that is having an impact. You're also seeing that in during times of significant challenges with regards to drought, there's feedlots, specialist feedlot systems, or even farms have sort of been forced to feed concentrates to finished lambs, and that has been quite lucrative. And there's a big push in Australia at the moment to bring sheep to higher carcass rates for the US market because the growth has been so, I suppose, maybe exponential in that the average carcass weight now in Australia is up on 27 kilos. So at a time where grain price is so low globally and there's so much grain globally, they're putting it into sheep meat and they're increasing their production, the amount of sheep meat they're producing, even with a lower number of ewes there. China is a funny one because so the Chinese import demand has been hit since COVID. The economy hasn't come back to the same rate. Inflationary pressures are still there. And what we've seen is pressure on consumption. We've also seen a slight bit of an increase in domestic demand. But the big thing in China is the availability of other meat proteins. And in response to African swine fever, there was a huge focus in China on producing more more pork. And what you had is these big sort of super farms, which like I don't know whether anyone has seen the photos of them, but essentially like farms where there's massive sheds that are multi-story and pigs being pumped out at an alarming rate, lower cost meat, proteins available to consumers, and that has put pressure on sheep meat as well. So there is, I suppose, maybe that sort of element, but globally, Kieran, sheep meat production has fallen right across the globe, and demand is expected to increase. In Borbia's Meat Market Seminar, there was a speaker there, Richard Claxton from Gira. Now, he was contentious on the Mercosur side. We won't get into that today. But one of the things that he said was that there's going to be a significant increase in global demand for sheep meat. Some of that is coming from North Africa and will be serviced or filled by North Africa, but it will create sort of opportunities around offal, co-products, and there will be growth in Middle Eastern nations as well. Now, whether that will increase demand is hard to know. And then the other thing is there's a bit of demand from the US market, but I think that if Ireland is to operate in the US market, we won't go in and rival the Australians. They're about €1.50 a kilo of a lower price. They can compete in the commodity market. It'll be the high value market if we're going to have any hope of competing there.
And that price point differential is going to be there. But like you mentioned in North African markets, the fifth quarter, it is another outlet for it. We have to look at it all in context. It's another positive thing that could be there. Darren, like, if they maybe take one thing from Australia and learn a lesson from them, you have to admire the way they can market lamb and how they're able to adapt and how the industry has adapted over the last couple of years.
Kieran, that's the lesson that's going to be on front of our face, I think, for the next decade. Because if we look at what's happening in the UK and this focus on a cheap food policy or providing their consumers with a cheaper option, and they've gone and done free trade agreements, and one of the big ones is with Australia. And like it came in 2023, and from 2023 to 2032, it gives them access to a tariff-free quota, increasing from 15,000 tonnes up to 75,000 tonnes. After that, there's safeguards for 5 years, but then the tariffs go. And like if we see there has been a significant increase in sheep meat to the UK market, I think that would have been greater if the US market hadn't performed so well, because I suppose what Australia is doing is targeting the markets close to hand, so high value in the US, putting other product into the Chinese market, which is returning the best value for that product, and then they're targeting the UK market as well. And what we've seen is that UK imports have increased by a few thousand tonnes, and in turn, that has I won't say displaced, but it has allowed UK processors to then target the EU market more. And we have seen an increase in volumes of sheep meat going from UK to Europe and from Australia to the UK to backfill that. And this is going to be also apparent on beef as well. It's not just going to be on lamb. And that to me is a sort of concern going forward.
And it has to be acknowledged that, look, it's going to affect a lot of our listeners. It's beef and sheep, and it is going to have an impact on the beef trade as well.
Oh, exactly. Like the tariff-free quota on the beef side goes from 20,000 tons up to 110,000 tons by 2032. And look at the UK as our main market, it's our most lucrative market. And look at it, while global demand for beef continues to grow, there's no issue. But if you get to a scenario of somewhere where demand is hit, well, then having access to that one of the highest value markets in the world is concerning.
That's why leaving that door open does become risky. If we come back domestically a wee minute, we'll just look at the trade again, what's happened over the last so many years. Probably, Darren, if we looked at this over the last decade, one of the other changes we've seen is we've gone more towards value-added products, more to breaking out carcasses. Has that flipped a little bit in the last year and a half again, back more towards that carcass trade?
Yeah, definitely, Kieran. We've seen a significant reversal of that. That we were talking a few years ago, we would have been talking sort of in the previous 10, 15 years, going from 20, 30, 40% of a product going out value added to getting up to 75%. And I have done like articles after some of the Borbia meat seminars, and the target would have been to get to 80, 85% value added because that's where the value was. But I think that over the last 18 months, and even since COVID, sort of the processing sector has changed. There has been a switch in dynamics. What we're seeing now is that we're seeing Irish processors more interested in the carcass trade, looking at taking in carcasses and exporting in carcass form. So I'd say this year is probably, or sorry, for 2025 come by, that has probably been 50-50, I'd imagine, when the figures come out, as opposed to 75, 20, 25%. And that is putting a bit more pressure on carcass spec at the moment. And that's why we're seeing, I suppose, maybe factories sort of reverse on where they've gone in recent years. And Irish Country Meats have been vocal in coming out there. They came out, I think, the first week in January and said that they don't think they're going to be going to 23.5 or 24 kilo carcass weight because of that sort of carcass market dynamics, and also to deter the amount of sheep that they're getting that they deem out of spec. Now, in recent years, they probably were getting a similar amount of sheep in that sort of out of spec category. But because there was a lot of work being done or to add value to it, there probably wasn't as much concern. And that's really under the spotlight now. And I think going forward, that will remain the case, because I think that because we've less volume, there's less choice to dip into that carcass market. So there's more focused in on producing a carcass that meets that spec.
Then in spec becomes far more in focus. Consistency is key then from that stage.
Definitely, yeah. Consistency and in spec and the quality of the product is really, I suppose, maybe there's a real sharp focus on it.
Okay, to switch gear a little bit, one aspect of the sector that there is a bit of positivity in that there hasn't been for a long time, and I think it'd be welcomed by all of us, is the wool market.
Yeah,
We have some good news, like, so this is one part of it.
it's not going to set anyone off buying a new quad or a new trailer here, but it's part and parcel of, I suppose, the confidence, the sentiment, and wool prices have been at such a low ebb for a long time that we've seen farmers looking at composting wool. We've seen pictures of farmers burning wool in recent years, which is a travesty when you think of the benefits of wool, that there isn't more demand for it. But sorry, making a long story short, we have seen a bit of an upturn. Prices at the moment getting up to 40, 50 cent a kilo. A real sort of shortage in wool starting to materialise. We've seen China exiting the market for a few years. That left a void in demand. There is a bit more buying going on now, but there's the reduction in numbers right across the globe is impacting on the amount of wool that's there, and that is having I suppose, a positive effect at the minute. The last British Wool Marketing Board sale, I think they're up 3 or 4% again. So going forward, the predictions is that wool prices will be better this year. Whether that translates into a continued increase, I'm not so sure, Kieran.
And look, it's great to see, Darren, because look, super product, very versatile product, and it's good to see a bit better returns. It might be one of the positives of numbers declining. Darren, I am conscious I've held you for quite a while, so I'm going to finish with the question I'm sure you're going to love, the crystal ball gaze. And if we're to maybe look at the outlook for the year ahead in terms of numbers, trade, where you see the thing going, we'll not hold you to it. I'll come back to you this time next year. But what's your sense of where we are at the moment and what we're looking at for 2026?
On the market side here, and I think that markets are going to be very similar in 2026 to 2025. I think that there is that sort of market dynamics across Europe now and probably with Irish processors as well, is that they're more cautious on the amount of volume that they think they're going to have. They're not going to be selling as much forward. They're going to be, I think, operating in a severe of trying to get the most back from the market, trying to sort of dip their toe into more premium markets. If there's markets that returning, I think they're going to do without rather than go and compete for sheep meat for that. So I can't see a massive amount of variation on that side of things. On numbers, I think that there will be a slight steadying. Board B are predicting that there'll be a higher carryover of lambs into the first quarter of 2026. I don't know how significant that's going to be here. Like, I don't, from talking to farmers, I'm not sure if it's going to be that big.
Yeah, but
I
still.
would have said at best numbers are going to be steady. And like there you're probably two factors. And then we haven't talked about this, and look, it's I think it's for another show for you to have someone on as well. But the unknown of blue tongue virus. Like
Yeah.
if we do get blue tongue virus having another, I suppose, maybe outbreak or another serotype hitting across Europe. We talked about production in Germany being back 36%. If you had a similar case in France, England, Ireland, it has huge potential to hit output. Like if we look at Belgium, and it was the perfect storm in the second half of 2023, they lost 5% of their flock in a period of 4 months. So the outbreak happened. There was conditions were perfect, very high temperatures for spread of disease, and we know that sheep are very prone to it, and that had a huge impact. Hopefully, the fact that we've lower temperatures in Ireland, hopefully we won't see the spread. In England, we've seen the spread. We've seen 272 cases of blue tongue since July 2025, but we haven't seen the same devastating impact of what we've seen across Belgium, across France, across Germany. But that's not to say that it's not providing I suppose, the potential or the environment or the infection load that if you did get the perfect storm of higher temperatures this summer in England, you could see a significant outbreak of infection. And hopefully we won't be caught like that in Ireland. But if we see a spread or we see a continued spread, depending on what way the infection load is, depending on what way temperatures are, we could be have a challenge in blue tongue as well.
And this is to an extent, the unknown part of it. You would hope, Darren, given the time of year that we've had our first outbreak now, at the time of year it's occurred, we have a couple of cold months ahead of us. You would hope that it would be more isolated and that potential challenge won't be to the same severity that we did see in Europe.
Definitely. That's the only hope, I suppose, that we have, Kieran, here is it that like, and you see at the moment, one of the biggest questions we're being asked is why aren't animals being culled on the farms that they're finding them on? And it's because that the disease that they're, or infection that they're finding is from sort of random sampling or surveillance sampling. And that disease has been there for a few months. It's not replicating at the moment. Temperatures of greater than 12 degrees is needed for the infection to replicate in midges, which are the vector that spreads it. It's not animal to animal. So temperatures are cool at the moment. So you'd hope that, as you say, that there wouldn't be that potential or that the infection isn't there at a lower level that when temperatures does increase that allows it to gain a foothold. You'd hope that it stays at a lower level.
But maybe it just characterizes one other thing, Darren. It goes to show us how very small we are in terms of the world trade, economy, challenges and risks. Look, we have seen huge changes in the sheep sector over the last couple of years. To an extent, the ball is our own feet where we want to go with it going forward. There is positivity there in terms of we do see more young farmers coming into it. It's an area that needs to be supported both from a technical point of view, maybe policy point of view, and if we're going to have a thriving industry in the future, there will be demand there for it. It's the case of maybe pushing that on.
But definitely, like, and look, it needs to be supported from a number of levels, as you say, like, but processor side as well. And we have seen some initiatives from, say, the processors with young farmers and that. But one of the things that is often thrown out as well, and it's very, I suppose, maybe it's a very realistic point as well, is that there's no point having an initiative for a young farmer if their father or mother that's sheep farming is facing very, very challenging conditions, hasn't confidence in the sector, because no matter how much you're going to try and entice those younger farmers in, that unless it's learned, unless there's encouragement there from parents to get involved in the sector And that is one of the concerns I'd have, is that if we don't have optimism across the sector, that's really what we need. We need optimism. We need a good year weather-wise, free from health disease, but that there's encouragement from top down, and that the vital, I suppose, maybe skills from sheep farming, and particularly in hill areas, are passed down to younger people to keep that going on.
Darren, really appreciate you coming on. I've held up quite a bit of your time. It's a very unique insight in the industry, where it's been, where it's going. Not going to be the last time I'll be back. I'll give you a chance for a break for a while, but look, thanks very much for putting that together for me today and coming on with us.
You're very welcome, Kieran.
We'll leave it there for this week's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. It gave a great insight to where the industry has come from, its current state of play, and what has shaped that, as well as some of the challenges and opportunities going forward. As always, if you want to get more episodes, don't forget to subscribe, follow us wherever you get your podcasts, and if you can give us a like and a review, we appreciate it.